Réponse orale, the Honourable for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Liberals' cap on Canada's prosperity is a threat to the livelihood of all Canadians. All Canadians benefit from the support of our oil and gas sector in terms of jobs, investment, royalties, taxes, and perhaps most importantly, our dollar. This production cap will mean fewer jobs, less investment, less taxes to fund hospitals and schools, and higher inflation on everything as our dollar collapses against the U.S. Meanwhile, more jobs for American energy and steelworkers. Will this Liberal government finally put aside its obsession with grinding our energy sector down, unleash Canada's energy superpower, and scrap the cap?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. Let's stick to the facts. Canada's overall emissions are the lowest that they've been since 1997. That's the year that Connor McDavid was born, and they're going down thanks to climate action undertaken by this Liberal government. The Alberta oil sands are by far the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Canada, and the Conservatives want to turn a blind eye to unlimited pollution in the oil sands. Madam Speaker, Alberta's far-right Premier Danielle Smith has spent $7 million on a misinformation campaign here in Ottawa to make polluting free again. That's $7 million that could have hired new teachers, new nurses, new doctors, but instead she's shilling for big oil and gas, and these Conservatives are helping her do it.
Good answer. Good answer.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, speaking of misinformation from this Liberals, the Environment Commissioner confirmed that this Liberal government is not on track to meet its own emissions reduction targets. Canadians are paying the cost of this Liberal government's carbon tax, and it's all pain and no gain. Under the Conservative, Canada's economy grew, and emissions actually went down. But under these Liberals, Canada's GDP per capita is collapsing under the weight of tax hikes. The Liberals' real plan to hit their emissions targets is to collapse our economy and move more jobs south of the border. When will they have the courage to finally admit it and let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, that is not true. Under the Harper government, pollution went up and up and up. In million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions, 716, 721, 738, 753. Madam Speaker, under this government, we've brought them down under 750 million metric tons after it was rising under the Harper government to an average of under 700 million metric tons over the past 3 years. Under Conservative government, emissions were projected to be 41% higher by 2030. Conservatives want to abandon our climate commitments to future generations and make polluting free again, and that's not okay.
The Honourable Member for Sturgeon River Parkland.
Well, Madam Speaker, I'll tell you what's not okay. The Salvation Army released yet another devastating report on rising food costs. The Liberals' tax and spend policies are driving up costs for farmers who grow the food, truckers who ship the food, and sadly, for families who eat the food. With malnutrition on the rise and scurvy making a comeback, it's no wonder that Canadians are dissatisfied with the menu of higher taxes and inflationary spending offered by these Liberals. It's time to axe the tax so Canadians can afford to eat, and get themselves to work. When will this NDP Liberal government let Canadians decide in a carbon tax election?
L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire, ministre des Familles, des Enfants et du Développement social.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We know that we are going through expensive times. This is exactly why we've made investment like the Canada Child Benefit. This means that we send parents over $7,000 per year to help with the cost of raising kids. Parents, when the Conservative leader talks about cuts, he's saying that it will cut these checks and make your family worse off. Is this what families need? No, I don't think so. We fight for Canadians, and we are there when times are tough.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Échemins-Lévis. Madam Speaker, new StatsCan data confirms that this government has failed. Per capita GDP has gone down over 8 of the last 9 quarters. People's quality of life is going down, whereas in the U.S., growth has reached 2.8%, much better. With an increase in the carbon tax and taxes on housing and capital gains, the government is once again putting downward pressure on per capita GDP, and this is affecting families. So my question is simple. Will the Prime Minister axe these tax increases which are making Canadians poorer? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Finance. Madam Speaker, I think that the Conservatives have an inferiority complex towards the U.S. The IMF, Madam Speaker, has predicted that Canada will have stronger growth than the U.S. next year. And this morning, StatsCan revealed that we have created 15,000 jobs in the month of October. Madam Speaker, I hope my colleague understands that we will be there to ensure that the economy continues to grow. I am proud of being Canadian. Why aren't the Conservatives? The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-Saint-Germain-Lévis. Madam Speaker, The Economist has revealed that Canada is actually poorer than Alabama, the fourth poorest state in the U.S. But under this Liberal government, $450 billion investment dollars have left Canada and gone to the U.S., which has a faster growing economy than ours. So, will the Prime Minister slash taxes to support Canadian families? It's very simple. It's not hard to do, Madam Speaker. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, I don't think my colleague has seen the numbers that came out yesterday from Statistics Canada. Yesterday, StatsCan revealed that our growth is going to be even stronger than initially thought, and that's because of increased investment in Canada. Global investors are interested in investing in Canada because we offer stability, Madam Speaker, and that's what counts. The Honourable Member for Saint-Jean. Well, Madam Speaker, we should not expect to see Donald Trump water down his threats of mass deportation. In fact, yesterday in an interview, he said he would take action regardless of the cost of the American economy. So there's a high risk of a wave of migration towards our borders. And yet, yesterday, just as Trump was repeating his threats, here at committee, the Minister of Public Safety said that Quebecers' concerns are misplaced. And he said he wouldn't do anything unless there is a crisis. But is it really misplaced to want to avoid another Roxham Road crisis? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question. As the Minister of Public Safety said yesterday, whether it be the RCMP or the CBSA, they have operational plans for all contingencies, and we can reassure this House that our borders will be protected. The Honourable Member. Well, while the federal government is still sleeping at the switch, people are organizing at the border, but not the government. Criminal human smuggler networks. They are already the ones pulling the strings at the borders, taking advantage of lack of RCMP resources. They were exploiting asylum seekers during the Roxham Road crisis, and today they are still exploiting people who are trying to migrate from Canada to the U.S. When Trump won the election, they got out the champagne because they are getting ready for a wave of migration. When will the federal government follow suit and start getting ready? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Now, of course, this government is always prepared to ensure that our borders are protected. The RCMP has operational plans in place to face any possible wave of migrants that might be arriving at the border. We will not be commenting on the operational plans of the RCMP or the CBSA because that could compromise safety. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Madam Speaker, the Salvation Army's annual report told us that 1 out of 4 parents are actually skipping meals so they can feed their children. That's 25%. It's like we're living in Les Mis or in a Dickens novel. As a society, it's unacceptable that parents are skipping meals so they can feed their kids. And yet, what are the Liberals doing? They're meeting up with rich grocery chain CEOs and are begging them, well, please be nicer. Please lower prices. It's a joke. When will the Liberals finally take action and allow families to put food on the table? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development. Madam Speaker, we are there for Canadian families with programs like $10 a day childcare, with the Canada Child Benefit, with dental care. These are all programs that will help families keep more money in their pocket and to face these difficult times, to help them put food on the table and to support their children's needs.
Cooper Kingsway.
Madam Speaker, no one should go hungry in Canada. But the Salvation Army reports 1 in 4 parents are skipping meals to save money to feed their kids. Meanwhile, grocery CEOs are gouging Canadians and raking in record profits. While the Liberals do nothing, Conservatives will let families go hungry because CEOs fund their election campaigns. It's time to cap essential food prices so everyone can put food on the table. Will the Liberals take action or continue to stick by greedy grocery giants like the Conservatives.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Madam Speaker, our government provides hundreds of dollars a month tax-free to help families with the cost of raising a kid. We've also helped implement a national child care program saving families on average $800 a month, and are investing in feeding 400,000 more kids healthy meals at school. And I note that that member in particular worked on a national school food program for many years, advocating for that. Isn't he happy that our government is stepping up to invest over $1 billion over 5 years to feed 400,000 more kids across Canada?
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost to Canada. The worst decline in living standards in 4 decades. The worst drop in income per person in the G7. The worst economic growth in the OECD. What's their wacko plan now? Slap a job-killing oil and gas cap on Canada, make everything even more expensive, and drive out jobs, businesses, money, tech, and talent. Over 450 billion Canadian dollars have fled Canada, fled them to the U.S. When will the Liberals stop fueling the U.S. and help Canadians instead?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
Thanks very much, Madam Speaker. Let's talk about GDP per capita over time in Canada. Between 2006 and 2016, Canada's GDP per capita under Harper grew from $40,504 to $42,134. That's about $1,800 over 10 years. Under this Liberal government, it's grown from $42,000 a year to $53,372 in 2023. That's by more than $11,000. So Conservatives, you don't need to pull out your calculators. $11,000 is more than $1,800.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Keep telling Canadians they've never had it so good. The truth is these NDP Liberals hurt Canadians every time, but help the U.S. and hostile regimes. It's nuts since so many countries want Canada's energy. Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Japan, South Korea, Greece, and Latvia all ask for LNG, but these NDP Liberals say no. 1 million Canadians need powerful paychecks from oil and gas jobs, but 9 years of killed pipelines, energy tax hikes, and oil and gas cap sends jobs and monies to the U.S., Canada's top ally and competitor. Why do the NDP Liberals send Canada's jobs to the U.S. and make Canadian workers suffer?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, we're working on the challenges that Canadians face with real solutions. At that time, inflation is down, interest rates are down, unemployment rates are down, and greenhouse gas pollution rates are down as well. And despite what these climate change denying Conservatives say, CO2 isn't plant food. That absurd Conservative claim that reducing our carbon emissions would somehow be bad for crop growth is straight up anti-science, disinformation, and climate denialism. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. We learned that in elementary school. The oil sands are Canada's largest source of industrial carbon emissions, and our pollution cap asks them to invest some of their astonishing $60 billion in profits in innovating and making sure that Canadians can afford green, affordable.
The Honourable Member Calgary Centre.
After 9 years, this NDP Liberal government has shown again they are not worth the cost. This week, the government announced a new policy, a cap on the Canadian economy. Since 2015, the United States has increased oil and gas production by 40%, much more than Canada. The world needs Canadian oil and gas. With the incoming U.S. administration promising to unleash American energy, this government has announced a cap on the economy, costing Canada 150,000 jobs. How can they justify this economic vandalism?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Transport.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The pollution cap will ensure our energy sector can increase its production while decreasing its emissions. Countries around the world are looking at Canada for less polluting energy. If we want our energy to stay competitive, we must lower our emissions. The pollution cap will provide long-term competitiveness in Canadian energy, so we can keep being an energy superpower for the world. Under the do-nothing approach that the previous Conservative government approached, Canada's imports of foreign oil were 2 times higher. They failed to promote Canadian energy. Madam Speaker, I would be happy to offer the Conservative leader and his party a briefing on this climate change.
The Honourable Member Calgary Centre.
Well, let me quote Canada's destructive environment minister. Look around the world. No other oil and gas producer is doing what we're doing. And one could wonder why. Or why ignore the warnings the economic destruction this Canadian energy cap would cause when it offers no environmental benefit. Any reduction in Canada will automatically be met by other producers around the world. The minister's announcement is nothing but performative. Will the Prime Minister get serious about actual solutions and fire this environment minister?
Yeah! L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire.
Madam Speaker, it's no wonder that the Conservatives aren't talking about the economy today. It's because yesterday Statistics Canada raised their numbers. In fact, they revised growth in Canada upwards. And you know why? Madam Speaker, it's because business investment is streaming into Canada. Investors are looking to Canada because we offer stability and certainty, and that's translating into growth and into higher paychecks for Canadians.
The honourable for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister was so excited about the new U.S. President that he sent him a gift. Thousands of Canadian jobs, millions of Canadian investment dollars. This Liberal government's carbon tax and failure to stand up for Canada has created an exodus of capital from Canada to the United States. This Prime Minister's policy have created a made-in-Canada per capita Canada GDP recession. While American workers are thriving, Canadians can barely afford food and rent. Will this Prime Minister stop sabotaging the Canadian economies and axe this self-imposed tariff?
The honourable parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry.
Conservatives seem so intent, Madam Speaker, on talking down the Canadian economy. They don't seem to be able to recognize the positive signs of economic progress and recovery. Inflation is down to 1.6% in Canada. Our central bank has decreased interest rates 4 times. We've attracted over $50 billion in foreign direct investment, propelling us to #1 per capita in the G20. That's led to tens of thousands of good-paying jobs in this country. Jobs that are projected to grow in the clean economy to over 400,000 by 2030. Those are real opportunities that pay the bills, unlike Conservative cuts.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Madam Speaker, these Liberals keep telling Canadians at food banks they've never had it so good. Well, here's the facts. The Economist magazine says that Canada is now poorer than Alabama, the 4th poorest state in the United States. Further, over the past 5 years, America's economic growth has outstripped Canada's by nearly double. Simple question. When will Canadians get an opportunity to vote for common sense Conservatives so that we can turn their hurt into hope and restore the promise of Canada?
The honourable government House Leader.
Madam Speaker, we responded to the needs of Canadians. That's why we brought in programs like the Canada Child Benefit, because we know that Canadian families need extra help right now. But what did the Conservatives do, Madam Speaker? They said, don't send those checks to Canadians. They said, cut those programs, Madam Speaker. When they talk about their crocodile tears for Canadians, they're not actually doing anything to help. Madam Speaker, we know Canadians are struggling, and that's why we've responded with programs that actually help them. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Madam Speaker, Donald Trump's threats of mass deportation are dangerous. The federal government needs to wake up to the threat at the border. We've been saying that, but today we've also heard from Fan Hampson, the president of the World Refugee and Migration Council, who said in Le Devoir that the government needs to get ready to face a potential humanitarian crisis. A humanitarian crisis, Madam Speaker. What is the government waiting for? There is going to be a potential humanitarian crisis. The government needs to wake up and increase its presence at the border. The Honourable Minister. Well, we need to calm down, Madam Speaker. The Bloc Québécois is constantly telling us about scenarios that are not currently in view. Our border services have a plan, and they will continue to have a plan to protect our borders. We will work with the American administration, regardless of the government in power. We will work with our U.S. partners. And the Bloc Québécois should stop trying to scare people. The Honourable Member. If the federal government doesn't do anything, dark days will be awaiting both asylum seekers and Quebecers. There may be a wave of people crossing the border illegally while being exploited by criminal groups, and they may have to wait under dangerous circumstances for 2 weeks before being able to request asylum, and then they'll discover that Quebec no longer has the capacity to offer services and that the provinces are refusing to help. This is a looming crisis. When will the federal government wake up and do something to prevent this? The Honourable Minister. Madam Speaker. Not only do we have the necessary plans to secure our borders, but we are also working closely with the government of Quebec, of course. We have extended funding to ensure that we can accommodate and house and offer services to asylum seekers. Some of the most vulnerable people in the world. The Bloc Québécois is constantly talking about immigration because they have discovered that it's something that can help them gain political favor.
Député de Grande Prairie, Mackenzie.
Madam Speaker, last year the Liberals imposed a ban on military chaplains from reciting prayers at Remembrance Day. Chaplains, veterans, and Canadians immediately fought back, and the government relented, well, for a year. But the directive is back. These Liberals are imposing their ideological ban yet again. Remembrance Day is a time for reflection and healing and hope. And for many veterans, praying is part of that journey. Will the government end its attack on the vocation of chaplains and allow them the freedom to pray?
Yeah. L'honorable secrétaire parlementaire du ministre de la Défense nationale.
Madam Speaker, I want to take this opportunity first to thank our members and our veterans for their service and their sacrifice. But let's be absolutely clear. The Chaplain General issued this directive independently, and it does not ban prayer. Actually, the directive simply seeks to help our CAF chaplains make their public addresses more inclusive to reflect the spiritual diversity of Canadians and our CAF members, Madam President.
L'honorable député de Grande Prairie, Mackenzie.
After relenting last year, Madam Speaker, the Liberal Minister of Defence promised, and I quote, chaplains are not and will not be banned from prayer on Remembrance Day, but that isn't true. They've now issued an even more draconian order saying that chaplains will be monitored and disciplinary measures will be imposed on those who say the word God or those who pray.
Shame.
This censorship is unthinkable. Will the government finally relent, end their attack on the work of chaplains, and allow them the freedom to pray?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madame la Présidente, je prends...
Madam Speaker, let me just once again take the opportunity to thank the members of the Armed Forces.
St. Albert Edmonton to please calm down and to please wait. If he's not being recognized, he should not be speaking. L'honorable secrétaire.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary can start over, please. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Let me just take the opportunity once more to thank members of the Armed Forces and our veterans. I'd like to thank them for their service and their sacrifice.
Absolutely not true what this member is saying or alleging, and I feel this ashamed that they are proclaiming this. As we said, we have not banned prayer. We are looking out to reflect the diversity of our CAF, and this is a directive that comes from the Chaplain General. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
The honourable member, order. I'm sure that the honourable members want to hear their own member's question. The honourable member for Durham.
Madam Speaker, after 9 years, the Prime Minister has doubled the cost of housing and put an entire generation of Canadians through housing hell. Okay. But who does he have any empathy for? His buddy from Bell Media, Tom Clark. The Prime Minister used $9 million of taxpayer money to purchase a luxury condo for Tom Clark in Manhattan, in a neighborhood called Billionaires Row. When will the NDP Liberals finally stop the abuse of taxpayer dollars and fire Tom Clark?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
While the Conservative members of Parliament are focused on distractions, we're focused on delivering housing for Canadians who live in this country. Madam Speaker, we are currently in a debate with the Conservatives based on their big commitment to cut billions of dollars from housing directly to communities right across this country. We know on this side of the House that it takes investments to build housing so we can make it easier to build. We can make housing more affordable. What is the Conservative solution? Cut. Madam Speaker, we have a long history of Conservative cuts to housing. It's part of the reason we're facing a housing crisis today. We will make the investments necessary to deliver affordability to Canadians.
To Just want to remind members to please settle down a little bit, because I'm sure that the honourable member who's going to do a follow-up question wanted to hear the answer properly so that he can ask his question properly. The honourable for Durham.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did hear the Liberal minister's answer, and I do feel bad for the Liberal minister because he's out here selling a generation that he is part of, a bunch of policies from the Prime Minister that have failed our time. They have failed our people, and he's got a tough job ahead of him to even rationalize what is going on in this government. But let's be very clear. Tom Clark, the Prime Minister's buddy from Bell Media, said that the housing he had in Manhattan required immediate replacement. This government then went on to spend $9 million of taxpayer money to get him a condo in Billionaires Row. When will they stop abusing the tax?
The Honourable Minister. The Honourable Secretary of Foreign Affairs.
I hope I get equal time to answer that ridiculous question. In light of what has gone on this last week, Canadians are worried about our economy, we're worried about our relationship, and there's no time like the present to have a strong presence in the United States of America. Our representatives will be working extremely hard to protect Canadians' interests, Canadians' jobs, every day. It's the cost of doing business, and we will do it well. We will represent Canadians' interests in New York City, the largest city in the United States of America. We will be there to ensure that Canada's interests are protected. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member for Nunavut.
Recently, the UN Special Rapporteur visited Canada and said this government is not upholding the basic human right to clean drinking water for Indigenous peoples. He urged profound changes. And now, Liberals and Conservatives are teaming up. Together, they won't give Indigenous peoples their autonomy and their proper funding. They are rejecting amendments to C-61 that came directly from First Nations. When will this government stop working with Conservatives against First Nations?
The honourable member for Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I first want to congratulate the member. It's an honour and a privilege to hear Inuktitut spoken in this House. Kanyanamik for those efforts. I want to assure the member that we are absolutely committed to seeing Bill 661 passed in this House, and they're reflecting the wishes of our partners. We are working collaboratively with all parties in this House. I would hope that the NDP would join us in that. We are working to ensure that we enshrine a human right to drinking water in this country, which we were successfully able to do with government amendments. This is quite a surprise to receive this question today because, again, Madam Speaker, it's going to take all parties in this House to make sure that this passes. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Strathcona.
Madam Speaker, last night Danielle Smith and the UCP fired their pension management team. Another step to pull Alberta out of the Canada Pension Plan. This attack on the CPP won't just hurt Albertans, it will hurt all Canadians. And we are running out of time. We know that the Conservatives will cut Canadians' pensions. I sent the Finance Minister my private member bill that would stop Danielle Smith from pulling out of the CPP. And I am more than happy to have the Liberals use my homework. Will the Minister adopt my bill to protect Canadian pensions today?
Hear, hear.
L'honorable ministre.
Madam Speaker, we join with the honourable member in worrying about these harebrained schemes to put Albertans' pensions at risk. The Canada Pension Plan is a sterling pension plan that Canadians rightly have come to rely on, and which the world over is recognized as a model of good management and stability. In fact, Canadians can be reassured that the Canada Pension Plan will be there for them for 75 years, as confirmed by the chief actuary. These harebrained schemes coming out of Alberta put Albertans at risk.
The honourable member for Kitchener South, Hespeler.
Madam Speaker, Canadian women and the 2S LGBTQI plus community have played an important role in our country's military efforts. However, many have overcome barriers and discrimination. This includes the LGBTQ purge and sexual misconduct within the Canadian Armed Forces. During this Veterans Week, could the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth share with the House our government's dedication and support to uplift the Canadian Armed Forces?
The Honourable Minister.
Canadian women and 2S LGBTQI plus veterans have faced painful hurdles while serving. This includes the LGBT purge and sexual misconduct within the culture of the armed forces. Canadian military personnel and veterans deserve to be treated with the utmost respect. That's why our government introduced military culture change legislation and a 2S LGBTQI plus national monument that acknowledges that discrimination. We thank these heroes for their service and never forget what they sacrificed to keep our country safe.
The honourable member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, after 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the cost or the corruption. Yesterday, we learned that Global Health Imports, a company co-owned by the Employment Minister, bid on federal contracts while claiming to be wholly Indigenous owned. However, the minister has so far refused to present documents supporting his company's statement. No wonder GHI has at least 8 criminal court cases against them. Will the minister produce the documents or admit he lied and resign?
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement.
Madam Speaker, the company in question has never received contracts as an Indigenous business and has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory. However, unlike the Conservatives, we will continue to work and partner with Indigenous people so that they have economic reconciliation.
Member for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes Brock.
Speaker, the point is that the employment minister's company that he co-owned checked the box claiming to be Indigenous owned. And if true, that's fraud. That's the point of this whole thing. It's amazing. And not only that, they circumvent the regular procurement process. The Liberals have no shame, Speaker. They would rather push down Indigenous-owned businesses in order to secure contracts and enrich themselves. So, if the minister will not produce the documents or answer any questions, will the Prime Minister do the right thing? Fire him.
Yeah. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let me reiterate. The company in question never received a contract for as an Indigenous business. The company was never on the Indigenous Business Directory, and we continue to work very closely with Indigenous partners to ensure their success. And we'll do so even without the Conservatives who are blocking and obstructing the very necessity of working closely with Indigenous people so that they too can succeed, and we will continue to do so.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the Minister of Employment is embroiled in allegations of conflict and fraud, and yesterday it was revealed that the minister falsely represented that his business is wholly Indigenous owned in an effort to secure millions of dollars in federal contracts. This is disgusting cultural appropriation and outright fraud. So in the face of that, why is he still in cabinet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, once again, the company has never been listed on the Indigenous Business Directory, has never received a contract without procurement strategy for Indigenous businesses that's meant to uplift Indigenous entrepreneurs. Our focus is building up Indigenous businesses through this procurement program, and it's all about economic reconciliation.
Order, order. The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, the point is that the minister lied. Let's look at the facts. The minister tried to scam taxpayers by stealing millions of dollars in government contracts from legitimately owned Indigenous businesses. The minister is a fraud. He is a disgrace. He needs to go, and he needs to go now. Why was the Prime Minister fired?
The honourable member knows full well that quite a few of the words that he used were not acceptable when addressing Parliament. So I would just ask members to please refrain from using those words to attack individuals. The honourable member for the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary for the Minister of Indigenous Services.
Madam Speaker, once again,
The company was never listed on the Indigenous Business Directory and never received a contract. But while we're talking about Indigenous Business Directory, I'd like to highlight that since we announced that 5% target, we've seen a surge in Indigenous entrepreneurs' interest and investment in that program. Conservatives were aimless. They didn't set targets and it showed. Only 1% of contracts were going towards Indigenous businesses. The Conservatives' hidden agenda here is obvious, Madam Speaker, and on this issue, they're being disingenuous.
Order.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Senators Peter Baum and Peter Harder just stabbed farmers in the back. They recently amended Bill C-282 to prevent it from protecting supply management in the renegotiation of trade agreements. At a time when Donald Trump is saying he wants to renegotiate CUSMA, these two senators are guaranteeing that supply management will once again be on the table. The Prime Minister appointed these two senators. The Prime Minister is responsible for his two buddies. Will he personally ask the Senate to defeat the amendment? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. On October 29th, the Bloc pulled the plug on agriculture and farmers. The Bloc Québécois leader decided that he'd rather we have an election than wait for C-282 to pass through both houses. That's the truth. Now, we are lobbying the Senate and the senators daily. I know some Bloc members are doing the same, but I encourage this member and the Bloc Québécois leader to do the same. They should call up some senators. It's an independent chamber, though, but we can always call them. And I also encourage the Conservatives to do so, because I haven't heard much from them about this at all. Well, they're so independent, yet the Prime Minister appointed the two of them, and they're his buddies. These two non-elected politicians, Peter Baum and Peter Harder, they are working against agriculture. They're working against the will of elected representatives from all parties in this House, as all parties supported C-282. They're not working for people. They're not working for democracy, but they are working for Donald Trump. They're guaranteeing that Trump will still be able to demand concessions in supply management when we renegotiate CUSMA. Say, isn't there a word to describe people who work against their country's democracy, against their country's interests, for the interests of another country? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Madam Speaker, the Liberal Party and the federal government have always supported supply management. In fact, our party created supply management over 50 years ago. We will continue to support supply management. Madam Speaker, the leader of the Conservative Party has been totally silent about this. We know that they were divided on the last vote in the House, but we stand in support of C-282, and we are waiting for the other House to pass it.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam Speaker, after 9 years, this NDP Liberal government is just not worth the cost. The Environment Minister invested $254 million in a company that he owns. The government continues to hide the documents. The Green Fund is against the interests of this House. When will we get the documents? Madam Speaker, what the member has just said is completely false. In fact, the government has already tabled all of the documents that the House requested. We did so in a way that respects the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Conservative Party is blocking its own blocking of this House's work. On this side of the House, we respect democracy, we respect the rights of Canadians, and we respect the authority of the police. It's funny to hear the Conservatives speak because the only things they say are, in fact, untrue.
Madam Speaker, what's funny is that the worse the scandal, the quieter the House leader speaks.
Yes.
After 9 years, we have another scam in the Arrive scam scandal. We have 3 new cases of fraudulent billing that has been sent to the RCMP. Madam Speaker, this is now a total of 7 cases that have been sent to the RCMP of fraudulent billing. Canadian taxpayers have been scammed a total of $5 million in this Arrive scam scandal, fraudulent billing. So why is this government always intent on giving money to fraudsters and scamsters while Canadians are lined up at food banks?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, I appreciate the concerns that we all have, ensuring that we can maintain transparency and we have adequate procurement processes in place, which we do. And we have initiated a number of practices, and we've worked closely with the Auditor General and the procurement officer to ensure that all of the processes are adhered to. And I recognize the member opposite is always looking for clips on her YouTube hit, but Madam Speaker, we're working for Canadians, not for herself.
Order. The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
After 9 years, these NDP Liberals are not worth the cost or the corruption. Remember the ArriveCan scandal? An app that should have cost $80,000 that ended up costing the taxpayers $50 million? Well, it gets worse than that. Now there are 3 more cases being referred to the RCMP for fraudulent billing practices. Right. When will this government admit that they've allowed millions of dollars to be siphoned off in fraudulent contracts to enrich their Liberal buddies?
Good question.
Well done. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, let's be clear. It is completely unacceptable that there are any fraudulent billings. It's completely unacceptable that anyone out in the public tries to abuse the system of working with government. That is why we have taken the necessary steps to protect Canadians and taxpayers by putting proper processes in place. And we'll continue to fight and always support Canadians and support taxpayers to ensure that they who need opportunity to work with government have that opportunity, but not abuse it. And we recognize the members opposite would agree, as long as they also don't abuse the system. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Lac Saint Louis. Madam Speaker, this is National Veterans Week. This is an important time for Canadians, including those in my riding, to reflect on the work of members of the Canadian Armed Forces and to commemorate veterans' service. We know that the well-being of our forces during and after their service is the key to their success. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defence explain to the House what our government is doing to support our Canadian Armed Forces and our veterans? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, our government has been very clear that our veterans and active service members deserve better than conservative cuts and office closures. This week, we announced over $11 million to support the Veterans Wellbeing Fund. Madam Speaker, we will always stand up for our serving members and veterans. Today and every day, we thank them for their service. We will remember.
Barry Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
After 9 years, the NDP Liberals are not worth the crime. Canadians recently learned that Paul Bernardo, the vile serial killer and rapist, is scheduled for his 3rd parole hearing later this month. This comes after the Liberal government allowed him to be transferred to a medium security prison. These parole hearings are deeply re-traumatizing to the French and Mahaffey families who need to travel far away from their homes to provide victim impact statements every 2 years, despite the fact that this monster is serving an indeterminate sentence. Will the Prime Minister finally stand up for victims and assure Canadians that Paul Bernardo will remain behind bars where he belongs for the rest of his life?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the Minister yesterday said words that I think are important for all members in this House, not to repeat the words of a killer. Obviously, we agree that public safety is #1 in this country. As the Honourable Member knows, the Parole Board is independent, but obviously public safety will be taken into account as they make their decision, and we trust that they'll make the right decision.
The Honourable Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Madam Speaker, the Information Commissioner has forced the Public Safety Minister to release previously redacted briefing notes from 2018 that reveal that Corrections Canada recommended against opening the Kingston prison farms because they would not enhance the likelihood of post-incarceration employment, not reduce recidivism, cost millions of dollars to operate, and make public safety results worse. Why did the government ignore this evidence-based advice, and why did they try to keep the advice secret for so long?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, obviously the Minister is not involved in the day-to-day operations of our correctional services, but I'm surprised to hear the member be so against prison farms. I, too, am a member of Eastern Ontario, my community, and I'm far, far east in Ontario, and I can rest assured that I was approached by farmers to say that this program was important. So I don't know where the member is coming from on this particular issue, but the community is supportive.
The Honourable for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
coming from the documents that were withheld from all of us for 6 years. Madam Speaker, on October the 15th, Corrections Canada closed the bidding in what it characterized as an, quote, invitation to submit an expression of interest to operate a commercial activity from a building located at Joyceville Institution and provide offender employment and vocational training, end quote. Now, I think this refers to the on-site slaughter facility, but the wording of the invitation is so vague that neither the building nor the nature of the employment is specified. Presumably, this was done to subvert the tender process so that only the preferred candidate can submit a bid and therefore get the contract. Will the minister advise the House as to the outcome of the bidding process and as to whether a contract has been awarded?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, obviously ministers are not involved in procurement processes, but what I can do is work with the honourable member and the minister can come back to him with a more precise answer. As he well knows, ministers and politicians don't get involved in RFP processes.
The honourable member for Dartmouth Cold Harbour.
Speaker, the Halifax Regional Municipality is on the front lines when it comes to responding to the housing crisis. That's why last year we announced an $80 million federal housing investment in HRM to unlock nearly 9,000 homes over the next decade. Last week, the Conservative leader announced his plan to shut down home building in HRM and across the country by making dangerous cuts to federal housing investments. Madam Speaker, people in my riding of Dartmouth Coal Harbour can't afford these reckless Conservative housing cuts. To the Minister of Housing, how can we stop these Conservative cuts and solve the housing crisis for Canadians?
Honourable Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
I want to start by thanking my honourable colleague, not just for his question, but for his advocacy on behalf of his community that helped secure tens of millions of dollars for the community that he calls home. Now, we're both from Nova Scotia. We've seen small towns and the city receive significant funding to help make it easier to build homes more quickly at prices that people can actually afford. We know that it takes investment to get homes built in this country, which is why we put billions of dollars on the table to help cities build homes more quickly. The Conservative response to this important program is to cut. They're trying to deny communities access to these funds, and cities are going to have to raise property taxes to make it up. We're going to make the investments necessary.
The honourable member Hamilton Centre.
Madam Speaker, with the return of Donald Trump and his reckless administration, Canadian industries and workers are at serious risk of being squeezed out. Now more than ever, we need to fight to protect Canadians and our jobs. Canadians need assurances that their jobs, wages, and labour rights won't be sacrificed in any renegotiation. So will the Liberals do the right thing and reach out to labour leaders on both sides of the border to stand up to Trump and defend the interest of Canadian workers?
Yeah. The Honourable Minister.
Madam Speaker, we will always stand up for Canadian workers. We stood up for Canadian workers previously, and we will stand up for Canadian workers at all times. Of course, the government on many levels, in fact, even today, I know the Deputy Prime Minister is dialoguing with labour leaders across the country, as I do on a regular basis, as do all members of this government, talk to working men and women from our communities and make sure that we're creating a prosperous and secure future for them.
And that brings